All right, everybody. So today we have Steve Shaw on the podcast with us. How you doing, man?
Good. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So as I was, kind of saying before, I know a lot more about you than you know about me, I'm sure. And I saw you on YouTube channel actually a few years back. And then I've kind of seen you here and there, and then I see you on Instagram. And I've liked pretty much everything you put out. I don't know if I've seen much that you put out that I've really disagreed with. So I thought it'd be great to have you on. But for the people who have not maybe seen you so much, could you just give a little bit of your background and how you got into this space?
Yeah, absolutely. About 12 years ago, I lost my job and I decided to start this little website called muscleandbrawn.com and just started writing my own articles. And it absolutely took off, picked up a huge forum following, and started to get asked to write articles for Muscle and Strength. Eventually got pulled on as a content director at muscleandstrength.com and helped them go from a little company to a big company. Gained a name for myself in content. Was asked to work at Tiger Fitness and help them gain a lot of traction. So behind the scenes, I've been working with those two companies, and at the same time, I've spent the last 8 years on YouTube as a big, hairy, ugly dude on the Massive Iron YouTube channel.
Right, right. And I've seen you there. And as you mentioned, I saw you on Tiger Fitness as well. Anybody who has seen you knows that you are maybe a bearded man, but also a huge bearded man who at one point was, I guess, by your own admission, obese. And now, obviously you are heavy, but you have a ton of muscle. I see the pictures that you post, very, a lot leaner than you were, very impressive physique. Would you mind kind of talking about that journey from being maybe the heaviest you were to where you are now?
Sure, I just actually made a little video about this today for a couple people, but I was really always into bodybuilding. In college, 1986, I went to school for astrophysics in a small college called New Mexico Tech, and there was like 800 students in the school in one small gym. And I started working out in the gym. There was an English professor that was a bodybuilder, saw me making progress, and he would give me tips. So I kind of picked up a passion for bodybuilding. In 2007, somebody introduced me to the sport of powerlifting, and they said it was kind of a sport where you could drink pizza, or excuse me, eat pizza and drink beer
Yeah.
after your workouts. I'm like, well, that seems like an interesting way to approach weightlifting. So I gave that a try, and it worked really well. I gained a lot of weight. I got to
Yeah.
346 pounds, was closing in on a 2,000 pound raw total,
Damn.
and nearly died from type 2 obesity, literally. Type 2 obesity, I woke up one day a week before my meet, and my liver was so bad off, it wasn't really effectively processing or efficiently processing minerals. So every muscle in my body from head to toe was cramping all the time with every movement. And somebody said, well, you have a condition called fatty liver disease, and it's very severe, and if you don't lose weight, you are probably going to have a heart attack because the heart is a muscle. So
And you were
um,
how old at this point?
I was about 45, I believe,
Okay.
and that began a journey. Like you, people comment on my physique or my transformation afterwards, but that wasn't the end goal. The end goal was not to die. And for 2 years, all I ate was meats, fruits, vegetables, and healthy fats. I didn't cheat once, not once. Um, Lost a lot of weight. After I stabilized at like 246, my body started to recomp and pull some of that muscle back. And I woke up one day looking in the mirror at a freak when I'm like, what the heck happened to me?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it is an awesome transformation, and certainly the health would come first, right? I mean, hopefully most people watching can understand that and put health ahead of physique goals, but it's awesome that you were able to make such a physique transformation as well. Um, Actually, and real quick before we go on to further questions, I kind of forgot to mention at the start here that obviously all of these, this charity podcast, everyone has a donation to charity. So before we delve more into the fitness questions, can you just briefly talk about the charity that you chose and why you chose it?
Sure. The charity is Run for number four, Aid, AID. DAN. It's run for Aiden.com. It's actually something me and my wife started exactly 310 days ago. We decided to train for a 100-mile race, and we decided to do it because of my YouTube following, to do it for a charity. So we found a local boy, kind of a miracle survivor of a car crash that didn't have a lot of support. So we've been running for the last 310 days to support Aiden. So it's run number 4 AIDAN.com.
Awesome. And I, of course, have a link to that below. And thanks for making me aware of that, Steve.
Sure.
So one of the most recent things that I saw you talk about, which definitely, I mean, of course, sticks out to me, and I think a lot of people in this industry, is kind of like more or less just scam artists, you know? And you have some people who I've named names in the past, but I won't here, but people who give this false expectation, and that could just be as simple as, you know, claiming natural when you're not, or things like that. But that can also be people who are just completely selling nonsense. And some of the ones that you've mentioned, I think, were Jim Stepani and John. I think it's Jaquish is how you.
Yeah, the Iron Man of the fitness industry, or whatever he called it. Tony
Yeah.
Stark of the fitness industry.
Right, right, right. So, I mean, what do you think the deal is when it's to that extent? Because you have the people who, you know, maybe they're using some gear and they don't mention that. And sometimes even I actually will say I think that's excusable. You know, if you are sponsored or there's legal issues, if you're not promoting, hey, I'm natural, I do this naturally, I don't really care. But then you have the people like those mentioned where it's like they're claiming something like 20 pounds of muscle in like a 8-week routine, or just these absurd numbers where they, like, you know, that they know they're lying, right? There's no misunderstanding. There's just, they're clearly blatantly lying. And it
Right.
seems like that's, you know, it's not just one person. I mean, it happens a decent amount. So what do you just think, is just being selfish? Like, what's the deal with that stuff?
I'm going to start this discussion by saying, back in the day, I was kind of, I have a really strong math background. I'm always interested in numbers and statistics. And I really dove into what natural potential was a long time ago. I've been doing this forever, and I was one of the guys that used to talk about full body workouts before anybody was doing full body workouts, which sounds ridiculous. I nearly got fired at Muscle and Strength for talking about, and that's a true story. Somebody asked me to get fired, but not to get off track. But I dove into the as much science as was available on natural potential. And back then, nobody knew anything about it. And anytime I mentioned natural potential, I'd always get clubbed like a seal. Excuse the bad reference, but that's about what it felt like. And even today, it's not something that's talked about enough, where people don't want to believe it. So most people are rather uneducated when it comes to natural potential. So it's very easy for these predators to get on social media or put up YouTube ads or ads, excuse me. And the people filtering these ads don't know what's possible.
Sure.
The people at Facebook and Instagram, hardly anybody knows what's possible. So it's very easy for these knuckleheads to pass along nonsense to the average consumer, because the average consumer wants to believe if they just find the key, the magic secret, it'll unlock that door and they can build
Right.
10 pounds of muscle in a month.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's what it is. It's a lot of people who are just naive, because it's really the people who are brand new to maybe a couple years in. I think once you've been doing this for 10 years correctly, you know, you've really been putting in the hard work for 10 years, you probably realize that a lot of what you were sold early on was kind of BS, right? I mean, there was a guy who was on T Nation back in the day, and he was 5'9", 245 pounds shredded. And he was talking about this program and all these amazing gains. And I was, you know, in high school, and I just thought like this was completely possible. And I just had no idea. But obviously now, after lifting for 15 years, I realized that I was way off base, you know, and now I don't have, you know, the best genetics. I'd say maybe average, but even with the best genetics, I mean, you're not going to be like what some of these people are. I mean, it's just kind of crazy. So, I mean, I unfortunately have kind of a pessimistic view on it, because I feel like it's always going to be out there. I feel like those names, it's what people want. That people want to believe, kind of like what you said, people want to believe that that magic key is there. So do you see that changing? I mean, you've been in the industry a long time. Do you see that changing, or do you think forever there's just going to be a greater preponderance of people selling that kind of stuff?
It's slowly changing. I mean, back when I used to speak about it a lot, there was really only Dr. Casey Butt who had done an extensive study. And Casey's a very, very wise and smart individual. And even to this day, people discount his study. But Casey studied 300 natural bodybuilding champions, the best
Hmm.
of the best, to kind of determine a reasonable standard. And back then nobody talked about Casey, but I was really the only one out there. I think my interview with him at Muscle and Strength was one of the first and maybe the only. But there's some experts that have picked up on it. Some, they provide standards that are a little bit off base yet, but are close enough into that ballpark. But I think we're going to progress to the point where a good portion of quality experts in this industry know what the standard is, and they'll pass it along. And I hate to put it like this, but to the sheep, right?
Hmm.
And I don't mean that in a negative way, but it's like the same thing with frequency training. People didn't believe in frequency training until a lot of big voices started to say it was
Sure.
viable. And now everybody is okay with frequency training. So I think it'll get there. There's still a lot of discussion and debates that need to occur, and some people that really need to rope in their expectations a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, and it can be because I think that formula, I think the work by Casey Butt is good. That was one of the earlier ones I came across because now more people do talk about like what's the natural genetic limit. That was the first one I came across, a long time ago. And if I'm remembering correctly, it's where you put your circumferences of like joints, like your wrists and ankles and things, and it'll kind of tell you maximum muscular potential. But you mentioned that these were natural bodybuilding champions, and I think that's what a lot of people don't realize is it's like, man, like I know people who look at those numbers and they say, "Are you kidding me? That's all I can have." And it's like, no, that's not necessarily even what you can get to. You might fall short of
Right.
that, right? And not to
Yeah,
say that,
absolutely.
yeah, and not to say that anybody who surpasses that is absolutely enhanced. Obviously, they didn't study every genetic freak out there, but on average, most people probably won't hit those numbers, which I think can be pretty humbling for people to realize. I mean, I think for me, I might be about an inch short on my arms, as an example, after 15 years of lifting, of what that maximum potential according to that formula was. And I don't think that's going to change anytime soon, after this much time. So I think people really
Right.
get a reality check with that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, the issue is, you know, I used to preach a certain standard. I have my own little easy guideline for folks. Usually it's 30 to 35 pounds of muscle over the course of your life. And whatever you have left, you can expect to gain half of that. Your potential would be half of that of the upcoming year. But 16 pounds a year is something early on I used to proclaim was about the max anybody could do their first year. But the amount of people that actually hit that are extremely rare.
Hmm.
Most people would be lucky to hit 10 to 11 pounds their first month or first year, excuse me.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure, for sure. And kind of tying in still with the genetics thing, something I wanted to talk about was I think it was a somewhat recent video you had up, and it mentioned how you get a lot of questions of people saying, "Hey, I'm getting stronger, but I'm not getting bigger." And I believe your general message was, you need to be consistent for longer. If it's the first year, for example, like it can take time for that. Not, I wouldn't say catch up growth, but you can get stronger initially just by neurological adaptations and things like that. And I think that's a great message on the whole. You have to be consistent with this over time. I do think there are some people, myself included, who seem to have more potential for strength than size. So just again, my own personal example, when I was around 19 to 20, I was deadlifting 405 for 12, incline benching 225 for 7, and front squatting 225 for about 15. And at 6'1", I was only 170 pounds doing that. So I mean, that's quite skinny at 6'1". But for a sophomore in college, certainly by powerlifting standards, it's not strong at all. But there aren't a ton of college sophomores doing that in general population. So for me, that was after bulks and cuts, bulks and cuts. So if you find somebody who over the years seems to just consistently be considerably stronger than they are big, relative to what you normally see. Do you have any advice for those sort of people, or is it just the genetic thing that you feel like is going to kind of stay?
Now, I don't want to address outliers here because sometimes when I give information like this, people will always reach for the outlier, the one
Right,
person that's the example.
right.
But for 90, I would say for 95% of people that come to me and say, I'm getting stronger, but I'm not getting bigger. When you look under the hood at their numbers, and this is not the case for you or the case for the outliers, but they're nowhere near as strong as they need to be. The folks that I have personally trained with, I've trained with everybody from Mr. North Carolina to Mr. Minnesota to some of the most amazing naturals you'll ever see. Um, they're freaking strong. I
Hmm.
mean, they're strong to a man. I can give in, and they're not necessarily big. I know a men's physique, a local guy, a men's physique pro, who is like a buck 53, and the dude's benching like 275 by 8. And he's
Yeah,
just he's a physique guy. So for the average person, yes, they've gained strength, but they might be dumbbell rowing 80 for 10 where they need to get to 150 for 10. So sometimes that little bit of, you know, first 18 months, that's a good start. But generally, for the average person, their expectations of how strong they need to get are way too low.
gotcha. Yeah, and you do see that. I mean, in that first year or two, and even the people that I've trained, you can have some pretty dramatic strength gains. And a lot of times, especially I find that if they're not very coordinated, they didn't have an athletic background, they can get a lot stronger because I mean, oftentimes they start off quite weak. And just by getting used to movements, just by becoming more athletic, they are getting significantly stronger. And that might not be primarily from muscle growth at all, at least in the first year or so.
Yeah, if I could address that point as someone that has coached a lot of women in powerlifting, most of the women I've coached in powerlifting, I've got to a 275 to 365 squat within their first year. And they're not they're not muscular.
Yeah.
They're just they tend to be have thicker legs. They kind of have an interest for powerlifting because they're strong in general. So to that point, some people are just better suited for lifts, male or female. And to give you guys one example, I'm not sure if anybody in your audience is familiar with Alan Roberts, but back in the day when Alan Roberts used to come train with me, there was a powerlifter, a female powerlifter that came, or female that came to me and wanted to powerlift. Her name was Jasmine. She had never touched a bar at all. And within 4 months, she was doing 225 by 10 on squats.
Damn.
And she certainly wasn't packing on the muscle mass. She was just built
Yeah.
for it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, certainly some people are definitely built for it. And it's kind of crazy. You'll see people. There was like an Asian girl at my gym. A lot of times you see Asians with like the shorter femurs and they just seem to be like built for squatting. And she was just, it was ridiculous. I mean, she never really even squatted. And I just showed her how to do it. And like right away, she was just going at it. And I mean, just a couple of months, she was doing 185 for 5, like very clean, perfect range of motion, and you can just tell when people are built for it and different limb lengths and all of that. Again, just another aspect of genetics that really factors in.
Well, one more example. My daughter took an interest in powerlifting at the age of 13, and for about 6 months, obviously for a kid, you're not going to have them do compound lifts. You're just going to have them do some fundamental body weight movements and some dumbbell things. But she had progressed to the point where, in almost 2 years of training, she was approaching, or she hit 275 off 2 inches off the ground at a body weight of 104 pounds.
And she's how
And
old?
well, she was almost 15 at the time. It was still 14, and she was a twig. I mean, my daughter had no muscle at all,
Yeah.
but she had perfected the sumo technique as well as a teen can, and there was no muscle mass really. My
Yeah.
daughter's just a stick figure, but she's another good example.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So going back to your weight loss journey a little bit and speaking more generally to the population, you have done a good job of keeping it off. And I see some people, I think Dave Tate, if you look at his transformation at one point, he was very heavy, then he got very lean, and then he got very heavy again. I think even people who are extremely successful in certain areas have a hard time, and not even just in lifting areas. I mean, just other areas of life. It seems like I know people who are, top executives, and they seem to have so much willpower in certain areas of their life, but they lose weight and they can't seem to keep it off. And I know you've talked a lot about these unhealthy patterns that can develop after weight loss, people going about it in the wrong way, that, they hit this goal and then it's just gone. What have you done to kind of stay leaner, not get back to where you were? And what do you do for your clients?
Well, I mean, initially when I got in front of when I came to Tiger Fitness, it was kind of a perfect storm because all of a sudden I went from a small being on a small YouTube channel, which mine was a lot smaller then, to a channel where I was working with the Hodge twins and Mike Rashid, and I had to look good, so I had some serious motivation, right?
Yeah.
Um, just like in the same way somebody in Hollywood have, they have a lot of motivation, but um, I was single again at that time, and you know, instead of me sitting around in an empty apartment on the weekends, I started to do a lot of hiking. So during the week, my week was always structured. And this is something I pass along to my clients, and I'll get into that just a second. But on the weekends, you have a lot of time, you have no work, and that's where a lot of people get in trouble. And I really took up hiking at the time. I would go out every single weekend and move and move and move. And that allowed me to be a little bit more loose on the weekends, but still just burn a ton of calories. It made it virtually impossible for me to gain weight. So the addition of something other than lifting made a big impact on, post transformation.
Yeah, it's actually interesting. You mentioned even just like the being single thing. I had an assistant who she was married and, a good looking girl, but definitely overweight. And you definitely see this sometimes where people will end up being single and all of a sudden like that's like a really good motivation to look as good as possible. And she lost 15 pounds, like crazy transformation. So obviously, that's not the recommended advice to stay in shape is to become single, but it is kind of interesting when you see that. It's like, oh, well, here's my reason again. But now, obviously, everybody is not necessarily going to be working out with the Hodge twins and having that type of motivation. So, for your clients that you train, do you typically just say find other activities to do, or is there other things that you implement?
Well, I mean, the base for any of my clients is lifestyle change. That it can't just be about looking better. It has to be about anybody can lose weight in the short run. Many people do. That's why most diets fail, because people lose weight in the short run and then they gain it back because they're not in a sustainable lifestyle. So the foundation of everything is trying to get across to people, whatever your goals are, whether you're trying to get involved heavily in a mixed martial art, or you want to get into, building the perfect body or whatever it is. Whatever you're doing, it has to be a lifestyle change, and you have to understand what the demands of that lifestyle are going to be, or what that lifestyle looks like. So for my clients, I always try to get them, that's the main thing. Without a lifestyle change, nothing is sustainable and nothing is going to last. So I try to get them to peek in that door and understand that.
Right. And would you say a big portion of your clients are people focusing on weight loss, or do they see your, really successful powerlifting background or do you just have a huge range?
I have a crazy eclectic mix. I really, really do. Now that I've picked up ultra running, yesterday I picked up a guy doing a 60-hour death race or whatever it is, and I have about 50% weight loss clients, and about 50% I serious powerlifting clients who, I had a guy recently that gained 150 pounds on his lift just in a 16-week, I hate to use the word cycle because that's associated with PEDs,
Sure.
but
Yeah.
16-week cycle and that sort of thing. So I coach anybody in anybody and everybody that has a specific goal, with a reasonable goal that I'm in touch with.
Right, right. Yeah, the ultra running is just definitely out of my wheelhouse. It's not something that I have ever had any interest in doing, nor is it something that I would feel comfortable, giving people advice on. But did I see you're going to be doing a 100-mile race
Yeah,
or
on
run?
my 50 set. Well, we started training like 310 days ago,
Right.
specifically on because we keep track. But my 52nd birthday, which was last October, was a tester, and I got to 100 kilometers. So in the last year, I've run 5 marathons, 350Ks, 100K, and I think half a million half marathons. So, yeah, yeah. In 77 days, I'll be making a 100-mile attempt.
Dude, that is completely insane. I mean, good for you, but that's wild, man. I don't even think I could do. I mean, obviously, like I could train to do a marathon. It's never been an interest of mine, but like, how did you go from? Was it just a new challenge for you, a new physical challenge?
Well, I mentioned I picked up hiking on the weekends to
Yeah.
get out of the house because if you're sitting in the house all the time, there's only so many TV shows you binge on, right? So I never kept a TV around because it was just a bad habit for me. It was
Hmm.
associated with my old binge eating habits that I had, and so hiking. I would hike. I think I'd hike like 70 to 100, times a year, if you can believe that.
Wow.
Something ridiculous. And one day, I thought, well, I looked at my now wife and I said, let's just go for a run and see how far I could go. I went 2 miles without stopping. Basically, the hiking had given me the conditioning to run.
Right.
I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. So a funny thing happened like a week after that. Okay. I had a friend who lost 100 pounds. Her name is Sarah, and she posted on social media that she ran 50 miles in 24 hours. And something in my mind said, that's possible.
Hmm.
Like, people can do that. And Sarah, like, I met Sarah, and she could probably drink me under the table, but she ran 50 miles in 24 hours. I'm going to do that.
You're saying
So
50, 50?
yeah, 50.
Wow.
So the next week I looked at my wife and I said, I just entered us in a trail marathon in a month.
Oh,
And
jeez.
the rest is history.
Wow. So she's pretty much doing all these runs with you.
Yeah, my wife's a little bit more quick, but yeah, she absolutely is.
Yeah. I mean, that's really impressive, man. I mean, it's good for you. And how much do you weigh now?
I'm about the same as I was, all the time. I mean, the problem with ultra running, and this is kind of adjustment, is you can eat a lot more food.
I would
Um,
imagine. Yeah.
so you find yourself a lot more hungry. So it's kind of been a learning experience. But right now, I got less than 80 days before my run, so I'm trying to get my weight down to, as low as possible before the run, just so I can perform better.
Yeah. But so roughly you're at where now, weight wise?
Uh, I usually hover between 240 and 250, and I'm about 252 now, give or take.
Gotcha. And just, rough estimate of calorie intake per day with all that running.
Um, we were talking about it yesterday. My maintenance level is probably 35 to 3,800 a day.
Okay. I'm actually
Um,
surprised it's not. I would have expected higher just because, I mean, a relatively high body weight and an extreme amount of cardio.
well, actually, I think it's higher than that
Okay.
because, I mean, honestly, the amount of food I eat tends to be ridiculous at times.
Mhm.
And the scale just doesn't really move. So
Yeah.
I suspect it's higher than that.
Yeah.
Um, because sometimes if I look back on what I ate on the weekend, I mean, I still drink beer on the weekends and stuff,
Right.
and I'll put away like 6 IPAs, which is pretty calorie dense. Don't tell
Yeah.
anybody. Um, well, like on the weekends, like I'll eat a whole large pizza and a bag of tortilla chips and 6 IPAs. I only do that, every now and then, right? Not, but I look back at the food I eat, and it's probably higher than 4,000.
I would imagine. I mean, obviously you would know better than I would, but I look back to maybe 2 years ago, and I was maintaining 190, and I wasn't like trying to go up or down. I was just literally just trying to maintain. And I was averaging 3,500 calories a day at 190, and I was, I was reasonably active, but not nothing crazy. 3 workouts a week, a little bit of cardio, some tennis. But I would imagine your activity along with your body weight would make it a lot higher than mine for sure. And this actual topic is really interesting because, like I said, it's not an area that I've really delved into, but I do know some people. You know Alex Viada?
I know the name, yes.
So I haven't talked to him personally, but my understanding is he's kind of this like super athlete with that sort of thing, that he's a very accomplished powerlifter and he does these marathons as well. And he looks fantastic. So it is an interesting topic because most people are focused on really priming one or the other. I want to get as strong as possible. I want to get, as fast as possible. I want to run as long as possible. I'm sure you're still focusing on keeping your strength high. I don't know if you're accepting some strength losses during this time or if you've been pretty good at maintaining it with all this activity.
Well, I mean, people people have kind of gone really crazy since I've started doing this, assuming, that the sky was going to fall. Um, One thing I've learned over the years is that once you have muscle mass, it's very difficult to lose it. It's
Hmm.
it's very easy to maintain it. You can equate it to rolling a boulder downhill. Every now and then it's going to stop and you give it a push, but it's going to keep rolling.
Hmm.
Um, but you know, people initially people panicked. They thought I was going to lose size. I thought I was going to lose strength. I don't tape myself very often, but I taped my legs the other day just to post it on social media. They're 28.5 inches. Um, that's, I mean, it's funny, but when I'm out there running on these trail runs, people will be like, they told my wife last time, there's this big power lifter out there and his legs are as big as my waist. So my arm size is what it's always been. Gym lifts, obviously I have a specific goal and that's to run 100 miles. So I can't risk injury because I've been training for 300 days.
Yeah.
So I don't do super intense, meaning super heavy squats or deads, but things like dumbbell bench press. I think I did whatever the heaviest gym is at LA Fitness, 120, 125 for 15 or 18. I mean, I do dumbbells for high reps. I do squats generally for volume.
Hmm.
Deadlifts, I only do a couple sets because honestly, when you start loading up plates and plates, it can take you 35 minutes, 45 minutes just to get into your first working set.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit over that. So, but strength wise, it's not an issue. If I didn't have a goal to run 100 miles or if I didn't have a goal to run in a race
Mm.
and I was just doing endurance training with strength training, I would push myself in strength. And I guarantee, based on what I know, that my strength levels would be pretty darn close to what they were before ultra running.
Yeah, and it seems I'm glad you mentioned about how hard it can be to lose muscle because I think in the fitness industry and a lot of people they look at competitions, right? And I think yeah, when you're getting to contest lean levels, you do have to legitimately worry about muscle loss, and it's still obviously part of what a lot of people think is muscle loss is actually the fact that they weren't as big as they thought, right? They're losing glycogen, they're losing water, and they're like, "Oh man, I lost so much muscle." And it's like, well, you might not have actually had as much as you thought, but still, in those extreme conditions, especially if you're natural, there is the risk of considerable muscle loss. But if you're going, if you're 20% body fat and you're dieting down to 12% body fat, it's just not that likely that you're going to lose a ton of muscle. And even when you take time off, I mean, I have 2 or 3 friends who at one point were all very serious with lifting. And honestly, for years now, they've stopped for a while, then they come back, and they stop for a while, they come back. And are they where they were before? No, but they're, within 10% of where they were. And if they put in a really solid 4 months, they'd probably be back. I mean, it's actually kind of remarkable. I mean, even my brother, he kind of almost took like a year off because of just an insane work schedule. And I just saw him the other day and he's as big as he ever was. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I mean, what people don't understand and what I preach a lot is that muscle memory is a scientific reality. Once you fortify a muscle cell, you actually add extra mitochondria to the cell. It's like putting an addition on a house.
Hmm.
You can move all the furniture out of that room, right? But when you come back to it, usually, I mean, when I took some time off when I had two daughters, some time away from the iron, and I came back to it in 2006, and in 6 months I had regained all my size, like all my size in six
Yeah.
months. So it's ridiculous how fast it can come back.
Yeah, no, it's a great it's a great thing for those of us who occasionally have to take some time away, which is nice.
Yeah, I didn't. The only mistake I made was not, labeling it the Colorado experiment part two, and
Right. Right, right.
right.
I guess one thing to just kind of wrap up with then is for the people who come to you who maybe, and again, I know I'm focusing a lot on this ultra running. I think it's because it's very different for me. Having done, I think this is my 79th podcast now. We definitely talk about a lot of the same things, and I don't think I've really had anybody on who's talked about this. So it is an interesting new topic to me. I don't know if it's one that I would personally do, but I certainly do have people who have come to me who at least have an endurance background, and they come to me wanting to gain muscle. And a lot of times I have not eliminated their endurance training, but I have certainly limited it for the sake of optimizing their muscle and strength goals. But
Right.
maybe, you are more experienced this both personally and I think now with clients than I am. So I'd be interested to hear when you have somebody come to you, what are some just general modifications that you have if they say, hey, I still want to hit both of these goals, and they're not, let's say, not super experienced in one or the other, because obviously then you're going to have to compromise a little more.
Well, let's start. I mean, first off, conflicting goals. If somebody's basically fresh meat, put it that way, and they want to build a lot of muscle, but they also want to um, run. Like if somebody wanted to become an ultra runner, they would have to understand that the ultra running would push the muscle building back.
Hmm.
Um, I'm an extreme case where I came to it with a full load of muscle. So,
Right.
it's a challenge. If somebody came to me with those two goals, we would need to prioritize what goal is more important. If it was muscle building, I would limit them to probably 4 cardio sessions a week of 20 to 30 minutes max, just to, keep their conditioning up while they focus on muscle building. Um, so I I would not want to coach somebody doing both at the same time. Um, not at all. So where you're at, when you're looking at working with people, you have to focus on a goal. Like the people that come to you and say, I want to lose muscle and build fat at the same time, like which one's a priority right now? Because
Right.
you can't chase after 7 chickens in your backyard because you're not going to catch any of them, right? So you really have to figure out what you want. Um, you know, and I would just like to say, for me, like I'm a lifter. I love lifting. My life's about lifting. My life's work's about lifting. But I'll be 53 this year, and you know what I want to show people. My background was always in fitness first. Um, it was always in athletics and fitness, and the whole bodybuilding world. I grew up in the Weider world where there was only flex and muscle and fitness and maybe
Hmm.
Ironman, and all the media was controlled by bodybuilding, 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 and there were so many myths and so much obsessive compulsive, the belief that obsessive compulsive nature was needed for the
Hmm.
average person to look good. The average person, not maybe your clients or my clients that are looking for as much mass. But what I'm doing now is like one of my goals is to see what is possible because I'm not making assumptions. That would be scientifically, uh, um, you know, ignorant, right? I'm not going to assume that I could get to 100 miles and not lose muscle. But what I really want to do is ultimately show the average person out there that you took a 346-pound man and 5 years later he became one of the strongest men in the world. He became a 100 miler. He built a better body at the same time, like all of it. I want
Yeah.
all the cake. I want all the cake. I want to see if it's possible.
Right.
It's just a selfish goal. I want to see what is possible.
Yeah, no, and I think that's awesome for sure. I mean, there's obviously difference between general population and people going to the extremes. I'm glad to hear that your take on the multiple goals is pretty much the same as mine. That if they came to me with that, I'd say ch choose one that you're at least more focused on. And as you said, you can kind of have that in your back pocket then when you focus on the other goal. I don't know if that applies personally. It's just not an area I've looked into. I don't know if that applies to endurance as well. If somebody built up a really amazing VO2 max, let's say over the years, and then they switch to lifting, I would imagine it's similar to the muscle memory that they would maintain an above average VO2 max, not as high as it was, but probably they could get back to that higher level with reasonable amounts of training.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. If I have a friend who's run 100 races, and um, he's just he lost a lot of weight as well. He lost like 150 pounds, but he's a blank slate. And if I took somebody like that and trained him, would he be able to sustain that? I don't know. That's a lot of of questions to be answered. But didn't mean to derail the podcast into running. My passion's
No,
still
no,
lifting.
it's for sure. No, I think it's great because I think, and people can, I'm obviously going to have links to your material. I think people are going to be able to see that obviously you have this great powerlifting background, that you're a very impressive individual. For me, it was actually interesting just because it was a little bit different. And I think, people can also take that, and it doesn't have to be running. It could be other activities that they're into. For instance, I Mike Israetel.
Yes.
So, he's very into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and he talks about that. He does it 3 or 4 times a week, and he has to compromise his bodybuilding goals because it's very cardio intensive to be rolling for hours and hours per week. Other people I know who like cycling, and I think it also touches again a little bit more on general population because not everybody wants their entire life to be lifting. A lot of people do want to do sports. I'm sure both of us have a lot of like teenagers and people in their 20s in the audience who, maybe they're still in college, maybe they are doing athletics, and they might have to find ways to balance out their sport with working out. So I don't think it was derailing at all. I think it was actually a great topic to delve into. So I appreciate hearing about it.
Yeah, I will say this. I mean, I'm running in December. I'm going to repeat my 100-mile attempt because I don't just want to do it once. I want to do it twice. Once is a fluke, twice is an established standard. But after December, I've never got in bodybuilding shape, even though I've been in love with bodybuilding, and I'm so close to that. Now, I don't want to get on the bodybuilding stage, but come December, I want to move towards how good can I get? Because if you look at my physique, I'm kind of built for it. I have, I have, the small bone structure. I have these long biceps that look impressive when I'm not doing a front bicep pose. So the point of this is that come December, I'm going to try to lean down and just see, what I look like at 10% body fat. And over the course of pursuing that goal, I'm not going to be running 10 hours a week. I'll tell you that much.
Right, right. Yeah. Well, dude, that's awesome. I'm sure you're going to look like a beast. So it'll be interesting to see how that progress goes for you. Where can people find more of your stuff if they want to see more of your material?
On YouTube, Massive Iron. And my website is superlivingtoday.com, superlivingtoday.com. I do a lot of general wellness and a lot of health coaching and not just power lifting and muscle building. So my website is a little bit more generic.
Gotcha, gotcha. Okay. Well, thank you again, man. And to everybody listening again, we will have links to all of that below, as well as to the charity Run for Aiden. So thank you again, Steve.
All right. Thank you so much.